Welcome to the digital studio of the United Nations Development Programme Multi-Country Office in Jamaica. This is Action Nation, our new podcast series featuring our partners who are taking action to reduce poverty, inequality, and climate change. I am your co-host, Gillian Scott, UNDP Communications Analyst.
And I am your co-host, Nikisha Lee, UNDP Executive and Information Associate. Action Nation is all about the champions of development who are putting in the hard work for people and planet. They are hard at work in communities, civil society organizations, and government offices across UNDP country offices program jurisdiction in Jamaica, Bermuda, Cayman Islands, the Bahamas, and Turks and Caicos Islands.
What can you expect from Action Nation? Close-ups of the real movers and shakers of development, the power behind our projects.
Also, expect UNDP project milestones, results, impact, and calls for action.
And guidance, tips, and resources linked to reducing poverty, reducing inequality, and reducing climate change.
We are more than a podcast. We are a movement.
This is Action Nation. Join us. In our Actioneer segment, we are pleased to welcome to the UNDP Digital Studio, Gloria Goffe, Director, Combined Disabilities Association, and Sherine Gordon, Vice Principal of the Salvation Army School for the Blind and the Visually Impaired. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, in 30 seconds, we want to ask you both, who are you? And we're going to start with you, Gloria Goffe.
Gloria Goffe is a woman who became blind at 7, and she has worked in the private sector and now works with the Combined Disabilities Association. She's a strong advocate for persons with disabilities, as she believes the sky is the limit for them once they're given the opportunity and the right tool.
We're going to ask you now the same thing, Sherine. Who is Sherine Gordon?
Oh, who am I? Okay, I have been at the school from 1994. I've been working with persons with disability. From before that, I've been associated with them. I remember years ago, I was attending Meadowbrook High School, and I met a young lady, and she's blind. And based on interacting with her, I developed this love for persons with disability, and I said, yes, I want to do something to assist those persons. And I've been doing so as a teacher here at the school, mainly focusing on braille literacy. So I really know the challenges faced by persons with disability, and I want to make a difference in their lives by helping to overcome some of these challenges.
How did you get involved in the community of persons who are blind and who are living with vision impairment?
All right, that's an interesting story. So at the school for the blind, the children are normally mainstream into the regular high school. Some students are. And what happened, they sent somebody years ago to the school, to the high school I was attending. And both of us totally blind. And both of us became very good friends, best of friends. So based on that, I used to come by the school, and I used to go to the playground, and I swing, and I did all sorts of things, and I play with them. And after a while, I said, yes, this is my calling. I want to do something to assist. So I went to Micro Teachers College, and I did the special education course, got qualified, and now start working here at the school and helping persons who are blind and visually impaired.
So today's presentation is looking at how persons living with disabilities deal with disaster, because the data helps us to understand that they're often left behind. My question to you is, how would you say that persons who are blind and live with vision impairments are left behind, especially in the event of a disaster?
All right, yes, I realize that they are left behind in many ways. Just by, you know, that in the government institutions, places should be equipped for all. So you will go into places and you will see exit signs and you will see assembly areas or assembly points. But I don't think those persons who organize those signs and areas thought about the persons who are blind. I'm just giving an example here, in which, how will they know? You enter a building, there's nothing audio to say, anything to say, oh, in case of an emergency, fire alarm, fire, there's an assembly area. So they are not really cared for in that way. They are not, when they are doing their planning, they are only looking at persons who are non-disabled. I don't think majority of the society or institution in their planning make accommodation for persons who are disabled. So that is a challenge for them as well. Another challenge for them is that you do not have enough materials that are accessible to them in the form, let's say, for braille, in the form of braille. And so majority of the materials, they are in print and they don't have it to read for themselves. I can just easily pick up a book. If I don't remember what to do, there's a fire, I don't remember what to do, my book is here, I can read it. But for them, it's not readily available. So that's another way, that's another challenge for them as well.
We want to know, Gloria, how did you get involved with the community of persons who are blind and living with vision impairment?
Well, I've been involved with the community of blind persons for the longest while, ever since I was 7, because I went to the school for the blind where there were other children with visual impairment who were blind and visually impaired. And later I joined a group of cultural singers. And afterwards, I became a member of the Jamaica Society for the Blind. And in my job as with Combined Disabilities Association, the association is a cross-disability organization, which includes persons with all types of disabilities. And we have hundreds of persons who are blind who are members of the association.
I'll ask you the same question I asked Sherine. How would you say that persons who are blind and living with vision impairments are left behind, especially in the event of a disaster?
Well, I believe that there has been quite a bit of improvement in that regard, but there are still challenges in that quite a number of persons with disabilities live alone. Quite a number of persons who are blind live alone, and some do not have the support. So in the case of a disaster, they have to rely on organizations to assist them, or neighbors. And some people do not have that, not have that support either. So they can be left behind if they have to be evacuated and don't know where to go. And they can also be left behind if they try to get to shelters on their own and meet upon various types of obstacles. So they are left behind in that regard. They are not necessarily left behind in terms of information from the media, but they could be left behind in the case of where they need additional support. Another challenge is that many of persons who are blind and visually impaired, they do not work, they do not have a job, and therefore some live in conditions that, let's say in the case of an earthquake or a hurricane, their homes might be damaged very easily and very quickly, and they could get hurt. So these are the areas in which I think they could be left behind. However, if they are armed, some are not armed with the disaster management organizations, how to contact them, like the police, the fire brigade, and so on. So some people will have challenges in that regard. But much of the information is produced in print, so some will have challenge in that regard.
So the Combined Disabilities Association and the School for the Blind, with support from the UNDP implemented Small Grants Programme, has produced a disaster survival guide in braille for persons who are blind. Tell us about the project, Gloria.
The Disaster Survival Guide was produced with the support of Canada Fund for Local Initiative in 2006. Through the Environmental Health Foundation and UNDP support, this guide was, it was made possible for this guide to be produced, to be translated into Braille. So the objective of the project, of course, main objective was to ensure that persons who are blind and visually impaired who read Braille have direct access to the information, not in summarized form, but in detail. And also, because of what is in the guide, they have some recommendations as to how they can best help themselves and help others in the case of a disaster.
Can you outline the main issues addressed by the survival guide?
The first of all, a topic that deals with understanding disability, because we believe that everyone who reads the guide should be able to understand the target groups, the characteristics, the needs, and the capabilities of the target groups. And the target overall group is persons with disabilities. However, we have various types of disabilities. So that's the first heading. And then we have main areas focused on disaster, events focused on floods, hurricane, earthquake, fires, and which includes also bushfires. And we have a section that deals with how to relate and work with persons with disabilities. And in that section, we deal specifically with the different types of disabilities. So there's a section on each type of disabilities and their particular needs. And then there's a section that speaks to shelter managers and then recommendations. And then there are some appendices that focus on climate change and how to deal with preserving water should there be a disaster where you have no piped water. So those are the main areas. And I should say each section tells you what to do, what not to do, the do's and don'ts.
Sherine, are there any standout areas of the survival guide to you? Any that you would recommend in particular to your peers and to those who are blind?
What I like about it, because Miss Goffe has covered everything, but what I like about the booklet, I'm thinking about my students, children. What I like about the booklet, it is light enough for them to carry, so it's really compact in a way, because many of these books, they are very bulky. Students can easily take this book, so they can take it anywhere they go and they can have it. I like the booklet as well, because I'm looking at my children, because you have to make it interesting for them to read it. Even the cover of the booklet is so nicely done. It is tactile and smooth for them to want to do it. And I know the children will like the way the topics are done in there. Instead of just saying flood, or instead of saying about flood, or say when water rises. So use all the interesting topic to get their interest, and they will want to read and read. So that's what I like about it. So by them more interested in reading the booklet, they will read it and learn something for it and be more equipped for a disaster.
Ladies and gentlemen, these are our actionaires. Spotlighting Gloria Goffe of Combined Disabilities Association and Sherine Gordon of the School for the Blind. Thank you, ladies.
Here are some quick facts about the status of persons living with disabilities, including those who are blind and living with visual impairment.
Did you know that globally, the number of people of all ages visually impaired is estimated to be 285 million, of whom 39 million are blind?
Did you also know that in Jamaica, approximately 7,500 are completely blind, while some 200,000 in total are either blind or living with visual impairments?
Did you know the mortality rate for persons with disabilities is 2 to 4 times higher than that of persons without disabilities?
In 2009 to 2013, the World Health Organization devised a global policy to strengthen advocacy and awareness to eliminate avoidable blindness and visual impairment. This is known as the Action Plan for the Prevention of Avoidable Blindness and Visual Impairment.
Also, did you know that the Caribbean Council for the Blind and Visually Impaired, also known as CCB, was established on September 24th, 1967 as a regional not-for-profit organization comprising of societies and organizations of and for the blind throughout the mainly English-speaking Caribbean, advocating for the rights and inclusion of the community.
Now that the Disaster Survival Guide is in braille and has been produced, give us a status report on the distribution and availability. We want to know, like, where can this be picked up?
Well, the braille version, the braille translation, that's circulated, has already been given to the Salvation Army School, the Special Education Unit of the Ministry of Education, Disability, the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities, the Jamaica Society for the Blind, and the library, Jamaica Library Services. However, the main distribution is yet to be done because of the fact that all of this is happening during COVID, when the students are at home, and especially for the school for the blind, the students live all over the island. And I assume that even for the Society for the Blind, I don't know if they have had enough all their copies, but that distribution would be a little difficult at this time. So I don't think in terms of individual distribution, it is yet as widespread as the EHF would have liked and UNDP, but I know we'll get there eventually. They'll get there eventually. We are actually translating it. The distribution is being done by the Environmental Health Fund.
Okay.
Foundation, sorry.
EHF, Environmental Health Foundation. Thank you, Gloria. And a follow-up question, how would you describe its impact?
The impact of the booklet itself has been great. It has been very good. For whom it was brailled, I don't think the impact has yet been as great as it should be, especially because how you would judge it is how much is done during a disaster, before a disaster, during a disaster, after a disaster, to facilitate, to accommodate persons with disabilities. That has not been tested since the booklet has been produced. But in terms of a knowledge base, for those who have read it, they find it a very worthwhile material, and they also feel that it should be a part of a geography lesson or part of social studies, geography, one of those programs where they will learn about the whole issue of disaster and how it happened, how they can prevent it, and how they operate during and after the disaster. So in terms of the impact in its distribution, it is happening, but not as great as it should be because of COVID.
Okay.
And that's the braille version.
Right. Thank you, Gloria. So my next follow-up question, I know we touched on the distribution, but my next follow-up question, Sherine, if you could just tell us, we want to know, how can we get the guide distributed as far and wide as possible? You know, what will it take? I know you said EHF will be the one responsible, but how can we make it and ensure that it's distributed nationwide?
Right now, because of the COVID and we do not have the students in one place, one setting here at the school. But we are the only institution of its kind catering for students who are blind and disabled. So the students are all over Jamaica, I mean Westmoreland, everywhere in Jamaica. So because of that, we did not distribute the books. So we just have to post them through the post. So we need help in that, in where we can post them off to the students.
Okay.
Mainly by the post, because it's going to be difficult for our driver to get to everyone. We don't have the resource for that unless someone wants to help us in that area to try and deliver it. So the cheapest way is to post it off.
May I add something I omitted and might have given the wrong impression. Although EHF, our main distributor, they are distributing in bulk. So they're relying on each organization to do the further distribution.
Okay.
So they will do like maybe 50 to an organization, 100 to an organization, or 20. They're relying on that organization to now circulate. So we get the bulk of what we're supposed to get. We will be distributing to our members. And I know the Society for the Blind will be putting it in their libraries. And so I think that's how it's going to be distributed. And then people who live close to other persons will also pass it around. Whenever we go into our rural areas, because we do have rural membership, then we'll do some distribution to those who read Braille, because not all blind persons read Braille.
Right. Thank you for that, Gloria. And so, Sherine, final question. This is, after all, Action Nation. And we want to know, what are the next steps in taking action to the next level on disaster guides for the community?
So it's very good that you have assisted in having this done in Braille, so it's accessible for persons who are blind and visually impaired. But we also have another set of persons who are low vision. So some of them are unable to read the Braille efficiently enough, but they can get access through large print. So it would be good if you can also assist us to get some of the information here in large print as well. But we will continue working with other organizations, such as Jamaica Society for the Blind, to have our plan, to better our plan, what we have, our disaster plan, and to have the students be aware of the plan, to practice the drills, so that they will be better prepared for a disaster. And we also want to aim at the parents as well, because many times we'll give the students the information, but with the parents not supporting, that will also be a problem there. So we are aiming to try and get the parents and to inform them, to sensitize them to what to do in case of a disaster, to let them be aware of what is in the manual, and also to get some print copies to them as well, so that they can help their children who are disabled.
My name is Andre Fisher. I'm a student of the University of the West Indies.
So Andre, tell us in 30 seconds, who is Andre Fisher?
Well, I am a hardworking, dedicated, and confident individual. I have been visually impaired since birth, totally blind now. I used to attend the Salvation Army School for the Blind and then transitioned to Jamaica College, where I passed my CSEC and GEF subjects and matriculated to the University of the West Indies. I am 26 years old and I enjoy reading, watching television shows, and mostly enjoying some sports like football and basketball and cricket.
Now that you have read the Disaster Survival Guide in Braille, what is your assessment of the guide?
I think it is a very comprehensive and extensive guide. It covers 4 areas mainly: how to prepare for a hurricane, how to prepare for an earthquake, flood, or fire. And these 4 areas were covered in great detail in terms of how to deal with it as a person with a disability, as well as how to assist someone with a disability to deal with these disasters. And I think that is very important because persons with disabilities have children and they have families as well. Families can assist them, they can impart information to their families, and they can impart their information, the information to the colleagues as well. And I found the listings, for example, there are several do's and don'ts when it comes down to like hurricanes and floods. So it was very extensive with great detail.
What were the possible highlights for you, other young people like yourself, about preparing for disasters?
Well, it had very detailed, as I said, it was very detailed. Yes. It had instructions in terms of how to act when there's an earthquake. It was very inclusive. It not only covered disabilities such as blindness or deafness, but also persons' intellectual disabilities and caring for children. I am happy I read it. Some of the things that are in there, including the appendices, they provided some additional information, such as previous hurricanes and disasters that have affected Jamaica. So I feel that it was a very useful resource. I'm glad that it was in braille, so I could have read it in my spare time when I was going to bed and so on, rather than having to depend on using a computer to read it.
Right. So you very much encourage other young persons like yourself to read this guide because it will help.
Yes, the language is very simple and the information is very detailed, as I said, easy to read, fun in certain aspects as well. The language is not very complicated. Persons would enjoy reading it.
Okay. Thank you. But thank you again, Andre. Thank you so much. We'll reach out and be in touch with you.
Ladies, it's time for our calls to action. Let's dive in. Sherine, I'd like to start with you. Persons who are blind and living with vision impairment are often left behind and left out in disaster risk management and suffer disproportionately. As we reflect on today's International Disaster Risk Reduction Day, what are some of the programs and policies that can be implemented to support the needs of this community and the wider needs of persons living with disabilities?
For government organizations in which you have building codes and regulations, the government need to have policies in place that before you can start a business, before you can actually make a building or approve for a building, it must be that it is accessible for persons with disability. Also in terms of considering disaster. Taking for example, if you are going to be making exit sign, assembly areas, they need to ask, okay, yes, are you providing for the entire population? How will the persons who are blind will know that a sign is there? They have to prove how all persons, everyone, including persons with disability, can get proper access, can know what to do if they're in the building in case of some sort of disaster. So they need to make a policy as that. All right, so they can either put a braille on it or do something with audio so that they can know and so. So that's one thing. Another is also because disasters come in many forms. And for persons who are blind, The government need to look on the infrastructure, especially on the roads, because I also, apart from braille, I teach orientation and mobility. And it is so dangerous for some persons to travel on the road who are disabled. I mean, the pothole, the holes on the sidewalk. So they need to cater for that as well. They need to ensure that it is safe for everybody, not for just some person, but for everyone. So we need policies in place for that. They need to ensure too that you have enough materials, not just all your materials for persons who are disabled, for persons who are blind, but also to have materials accessible to all. So if the school is going to be sending brochures based on disasters or anything else, they must consider, okay, I need to cater for persons who are blind, I need to cater for persons who are low vision, I need to ensure that the person, all the material needs to cater for persons who are hearing impaired. So they need to just cater for everyone.
I think the government should ensure strict adherence and where necessary penalties for those who do not observe the building code. Because the building code, Jamaica's building code, has a section that speaks specifically to the unnecessary, what's the word? Speaks to the way buildings should be constructed and roadways should be constructed and facilities to ensure that there's physical accessibility. Because if there is, then, as Sherine said, people would have a quicker escape or know where to go, and it will prevent disaster in itself. The other thing I believe is that each disaster committee for each parish should have a representative on that committee who can relate and make recommendations to ensure the inclusion of persons with disabilities and their needs before, during, and after a disaster. I also believe that each workplace should have a disaster plan that includes persons, workers with disabilities. And even if you do not have a worker with a disability, then you don't know when that will happen or when somebody within the organization will become disabled. So I think all workplace under the Occupational Safety and Health Act, every workplace should have a disaster plan and the necessary infrastructure to ensure that persons with disabilities needs are taken into consideration.
Ladies, how can we individually support the cause of helping persons living with disabilities to survive disasters? You're talking to us a lot about what government and the state needs to do and organizations need to do. But do we have a personal responsibility? What can we as individuals do to make a difference?
I believe that each individual take it on themselves to ensure that persons with disabilities who live with them and around them are catered to during a disaster, even before the disaster. But there are some disasters that are kind of predictable, like a hurricane. I personally know that I have a responsibility to persons with disabilities in Jamaica because of where I sit as the executive director of an organization whose main focus is on persons with disabilities. So I can do that by having a list of persons, especially those in flood-prone areas or disaster-prone areas, and pass that on to the Office for Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management. I have a responsibility to participate in events that could educate and inform me more about how to prevent disasters, and if cannot be presented, how to deal with persons with disabilities during that disaster. I also have a responsibility to liaise with the organizations that cater to, that deals with prevention, disaster management, the whole issue related to disaster and climate change. So I pass that on to my I can also ensure that their issues are taken into consideration.
Would you say enough work is being done in educating persons living with disabilities on how they should plan for disaster? And if not, what are some of the channels of communication and information that we can use to ensure that they get the message and they get it on time?
Okay, there, as Ms. Goffe said, there has been improvement in that area, educating persons with disability in how to prepare for disaster, but there needs to be more. So what we can do is to make sure you involve them in the planning. So when we're planning, we're doing, make sure they are involved as well. Ensure that you have sensitization programs in which we let persons around be aware that these persons can assist. They are human beings, and they can also help themselves if they are being informed how to do so. All right, so you don't have them just there saying they are helpless and can't do certain things. So you inform that you let others be aware and let them help them to sensitize.
Yeah, I just wanted to find out from you, what are the channels of communication? Because they're not going to be able to see a lot of the messages. So how do we reach persons with disabilities? What are some of the channels of communication that are best suited to reach persons who are blind?
All right, some of the challenge, or some of the communications, what you can do is modes of communication to reach them is through audio. So the media plays a good part in that, through the audio. You can also have through the radio, and through the radio. And you can also have braille materials for them, for persons who are totally blind.
Yes.
You can also have materials in large print as well for them to access the information. So those are the main ways in which you can communicate the information to them.
And adding to Sherine, the social media is another way, the internet is another way of getting information, because quite a number of persons who are impaired do have cell phones with the necessary speech software and computers with the speech software. So emails, WhatsApp, those platforms, they're able to access information on. Another way is to ensure that the school, the classroom, because our students, our children also need to know what is happening in that regard. So I believe that in teachers' classroom, students should be taught about disaster preparedness and emergency management and climate change. So the teachers could also pass on information. That's another channel, especially for the students.
Yes, I can I add too? And for all the schools that cater for persons with disabilities, they should be doing their drills same way, and so they have their drills every term or so, catering for that population. So you will know exactly that when you're having the drills, if it's for persons who are blind, you will have certain things in place, certain tactile materials, certain ways, and you will explain to them what to do. So those persons, those institutions must have their regular drills and sensitize the students, as Ms. Scott said as well.
You actually both answered the question that I had, which was about the technology, in terms of WhatsApp and social media, and if there were specific types of technology that allowed persons living with disabilities to participate. And so that question was answered. Is that technology readily available through institutions like School for the Blind? How do people get a hold of that technology in Jamaica?
We need the students to get information through braille. We normally use the braille machine or the braille embosser. And those equipment are sold only abroad. So they are not so accessible at all. So we don't have enough of those. We always don't. We don't have enough of persons who are trained to fix those equipment as well. So we are always short In terms of equipment like embosser, they're very expensive as well. And because they're expensive, sometimes institutions cannot afford those material devices.
Okay, but I want to press home this point because there is something to be said for enabling greater access to the machinery, for example, that makes braille, and as well the kind of software that is attached to like computers and the internet to enable participation. What call to action would you like to make at this point to make those kinds of things more accessible and readily available to your community?
I think that some of these things that the government can subsidize so that persons can be able to afford some of them, because you have one or two which are free, but some are not, especially the very good ones. They're expensive, and many of these persons with disabilities cannot afford them. So if the government can help out in that way to subsidize the cost for them.
Oh, it's fine.
As well as sometimes we need to also sensitize persons with disabilities of some of those software and devices that are available to them, because some of them, they don't know about them. So we can educate them that they can use certain things to gain information, which is available, and many of them are free.
Yes. Gloria, do you have anything to add to that?
Hello?
Ready access to the resources for participation in the modern world, the technology that is required by the community?
In terms of the access to equipment, to technology, I would say the majority of persons who are blind have difficulties, because apart from the school for the blind, which provide the Perkins braille, those for brailing and the embosser, as Sherine mentioned, most of the embossers that now exist are old and functioning. And secondly, for the other equipment, a technology like computers and telephones, smartphones, and so on, it's a number of persons cannot afford to purchase them, and those who are able to, they have to rely on other people to do. Those who are able to get those phones have to rely on. They need training as to how to use them. There are systems being set up for that, but not everybody can access them. And then the other issue is purchasing the data for the vast majority who are unemployed, or parts of Jamaica who have challenges getting the signals. So the unfortunate thing is that the government has not really taken technology for persons who are blind and visually impaired, or for persons with disabilities in general, in a real way. So much of the equipment have to be purchased through the Jamaica Society for the Blind for persons who are blind. So where the Jamaica Society for the Blind cannot afford to purchase equipment that we need, then persons with disabilities have to rely on friends or family overseas, and believe you me, there are not many who will purchase the equipment. So we really have a challenge. Although we're going we're in the technological age, and persons who are blind and visually impaired are learning various types of technology, we are still behind in terms of the types of technology and in terms of really accessing them.
What's next on the agenda in terms of ensuring the safety of persons in your community? Just 30 seconds, the top item on the agenda that is next for you, starting with you, Sherine. What's next for School for the Blind? Disaster risk management.
Disaster risk management, right. Well, first we have to try and get over this COVID. All right, so, but as soon as the students are back in school, yes, because we are in, yes, is to continue having our drills, continue sensitizing the students about disasters, make improvement on that, so we really need to improve on compliance, especially with the members, the staff as well, compliance. So we continue with that. We are also trying to make some of these materials accessible to our students instead of just audio talking. We are trying to get some in braille as well. But sometimes we have to work with the companies to have the copyright so that we can get the materials available to our students. So that is our aim now, to improve on what we have, to work with other organizations such as Jamaica Society for the Blind, Jamaica Council for Persons with Disability, to help and build on what we have, to improve on that so that our students can be safe or safer in terms of disaster. And
Thank you, Sherine. Thanks, Sherine. And for you, Gloria, just in 30 seconds, next on the agenda for disaster.
Yes, for us, for Combined Disabilities Association, we have three main focus in terms of this area: disaster management and persons who are disabled. First of all, we have to continue our advocacy in ensuring that some of the things we recommend are put in place. So we'll continue to liaise with ODPEM. Secondly, we also want to have an island-wide sensitization program with our members, with persons with disabilities. Third, and this would be on disaster preparedness and the whole issue of climate change and how they are to protect themselves, help others to protect them and also protect themselves. And then thirdly, we want to invest in a new braille embosser where we can now produce the materials that we need to produce in braille for persons who are blind and visually impaired more speedily, and produce more material. So that's the three areas that we want to look at in the not too distant future.
Ladies, I want to thank you so much for being the first actioneers to join us on Action Nation, the new podcast series from UNDP in Jamaica. Those of us listening on radio land and in video, we want to thank you so much for joining us. These are our actioneers: Gloria Goffe, Sherine Gordon, working quietly behind the scenes, making a difference among the community of persons living with disabilities. Thank you so much, ladies.
Thanks for having us.
And happy International Risk Reduction Day.
Yes, same to you.
Thank you. Yes.
Thanks to UNDP for its support.
I endorse that too.
It is our pleasure and our honor.